Hey guys, Charmander wearing a white mage cloak here. Today I'm looking at something a little different from the usual crowd of games I cover to talk about an indie game released last month. Full disclosure, the devs actually reached out to us and asked if we could review this game, and I decided to give it a shot. Now, we're not getting paid to do any of this, so expect the rest of this review to be oozing with Casnarius bias, and not shiny, beautiful, ethically moral monetary bias. That said, I will make a point to mention that the person who made the tutorial to activate my review copy wrote at the bottom of the doc that they loved me, and honestly, that really got me through a tough time in my life. Until I read this, I remained alone, unloved, unnoticed by my fellow human inhabitants that roam this blue carbon ball, but this one person telling me they loved me really turned my life around, knowing that I was special enough to be loved by a total stranger. I'm not saying that realization will impact the review, but I will say that it changed my life forever, and I'm not the same person I was going into this game. The Crackpet Show is a top-down indie shooter roguelike bullet hell where you play as adorable pets, blissfully unaware of the atrocities they're about to be a part of, or, in many cases, commit. The premise is pretty basic. It's the future, you play as one of many metaphorically cracked and actually diagnosably insane animals who head into an arena to kill hundreds of other equally deranged animals for the entertainment of weirdos who tune in to watch you. Think Happy Tree Friends meets Smash TV and you've pretty much got the gist of your goal here. Also, really think Happy Tree Friends, because this game delights in you murdering every enemy on screen in the most fantastic and visceral ways. Blood explosions, heads bursting, eyes popping, you are an instrument of death dispensing rounds of bullet juice to anybody and everybody who wants a taste, and by God, you have brought the whole damn juice aisle with you. Your Tropicana-infused massacre only ends when you either finish the stage or are added to the pile. The devs love this. They appear to wear this fact as a badge of honor, and unfortunately, it's at this point where I have to bring the tone down a bit and say, I really wasn't a big fan of this art style. Kinda like Nobody Saves the World, the more I look at this game, the more images of disgusting Canadian cartoons that should remain unnamed dredge their way into the front of my brain. This style isn't for me, but I will not mark it as a point against the game. I am sure that there are people who will appreciate the never-ending cartoon Crimson Carcass cacophony that this game is, and those people are going to truly love this experience. In Crackpet, you go through one of 6 episodes in a season, with 3 seasons making up 18 episodes total, and each episode has a sequence of levels leading up to a big boss at the end. You get to see the routes for each path leading to the boss of the episode, and with each new run comes a different randomized set of paths you can take to pick up rewards en route. Levels can hold a suite of different goodies for helping you survive. You've got stages that give you guns that can range from a basic machine gun, to a grenade launcher, to rail guns, to rainbow shotguns, to, yes, the quote-unquote Doom gun. The Doom gun sucks, by the way. These balls hit like a truck, but they move slower than that same truck in bumper-to-bumper traffic. A personal favorite armament of mine was simply called the random gun, which fired off a shot from any gun in the game every time you pulled the trigger. Suddenly, it's not that bad to get the Doom gun ball sometimes. Some stages give you limited use items that can range from healing you, to having you take a dookie nukie on the floor, to, well, just kind of breaking the game. Then you've got perk stages, and this is where the real magic happens, because getting a perk can add a lot to your run. Homing bullets, electric bullets, AoE bullets, faster movement, health upgrades. Honestly, there's probably even a perk that
makes you breakfast. I don't know.
You can have up to 6 perks, and some of these, with the right combinations and the right guns, can just obliterate anything that decides to share the screen with you, and I loved happening upon weird combos that made me feel really powerful. When Crackpet's guns, items, and perks coalesce, and you're killing more animals than PETA on a good year, it feels stupid fun to play. That element of chance for what could be a good build, or even a great build, was certainly one of the reasons I stayed with this game. But even when the not-so-great perks came around, I still found myself trying to work with what I had because, well, who knows? Maybe I'd find some weird synergy with that one weird perk that makes me crap on the floor every time I get hit down the line. Actually, let me help you with that answer. You will never find a perk that synergizes with this garbage perk. Why did they even put this in the game? For the first 5 episodes, I pretty much destroyed everything with no issues. I was prepared to finish this game up in 7 hours, tell you all this has the base of a fun roguelike, but it was too easy, and call it a day. Then, episode 6 happened. Oh, that's strange, I thought, as I died for my first time playing this game. I must not have been paying attention. Then, soon, I came to find and accept on my 4th time dying to MacBat64 that the game had gotten significantly harder than when I started playing it. It took me probably 8 tries to finally kill this bat, and afterwards I thought surely the rest of the game would be easier than this. Season 2 would reset the difficulty and we'd be back to smooth sailing. I realize now that I was a fool. Suddenly, the Crackpet Show starts changing up the variations on its enemies. The arenas start having more waves, the actual paths to each boss start to get longer, making every hit you take be a serious detriment to you if you don't have a plan to deal with that lost life for the long haul. Enemies that buff other enemies start showing up, and even this game's equivalent of a Goomba are given gimmicks that make them harder to deal with. Those guys that lobbed bullets at you over your cover start to become a much bigger problem when those bullets leave giant hurt pools on the ground. And of course, the bosses stop pulling their punches, and suddenly you begin to realize why this game has the bullet hell tag on its Steam page. The Crackpet Show lulls you in with its simplicity. It makes you feel unkillable with its early stages, and then it smashes the floor you're standing on and you fall into a pit of suffering and agony. On Season 2, Stage 3, I was legitimately telling the guys that I was going to throw in the towel and try to review this game without beating it. All those awesome perk combos you found in the first stages, they'll still help, of course, and you can upgrade those weapons permanently too, but all of it will only get you so far. This game drags you down and forces you to get good or get wrecked. There's no grinding out resources to level up past the bosses, and even the best builds get thrown in the trash if you don't have the footwork to back up all that power you're carrying. It's in moments like this where there's just so much garbage on the screen. When you're acting, you're reacting, you're analyzing patterns, all the while subconsciously shooting and managing your weapons with the right timing, where Crackpet truly shines. And boss fights are made all the more intense because you know you'll have to go back to the beginning of a run if you die there. But to really appreciate the sheer amount of nasty hurt pellets this game chucks at you, we need to talk about the technical side of how this game does movement and firing. You have a dash that is absolutely essential for staying alive. If you've played through Hades, you know how invaluable a good dash is, and yeah, this one is pretty forgiving. You cover a nice amount of distance and you're invincible when you use it, and use it you most definitely will. Enemies will sometimes drop hearts, which I'm sure you can imagine are an invaluable resource when you're fighting gauntlets of them at a time. The thing about hearts though is that they don't stick around for long. When a heart drops, you'd better be canceling your afternoon plans and start to work out how to get it in the next 7 seconds, because a heart's usefulness is only matched by its eagerness to leave me like every other woman who's ever loved me. Honestly though, it's a feature. When hearts disappear so quickly, it discourages strategies where you pop out from corners and camp to avoid enemies, and it makes you want to keep constantly moving in case one spawns. The short runtime on these actually conditions you to be a better player, and be more aware of your surroundings to try and pick them up. And that's good game design. Along with hearts, the game also has traps to further incentivize constant movement. Going over these at anything slower than top speed will cause damage, and keeping the player on their toes while they're forced to assess the threats in the room is also a great way to condition them for the harder parts of the game. To further emphasize the importance of movement, the Crackpet Show actually has another strange element to its game design. Every time you fire, your character stops moving, and as you can imagine, that can get really nasty when the boss decides it wants to shoot all 5,294 of its friendship pellets at your face. Compounding this problem is that shooting on a trap activates it, even if it's just for a millisecond, and that means you actually have to time out your shots and watch your reload speeds, or switch to a secondary gun while your first gun reloads. The game forcing you to stop while shooting actually adds a whole other layer to combat that I wasn't expecting, and I have to say, it's better for it. Every bone in my body wants to hold down the trigger and forget that I'm shooting, and I found that through the game's earlier easy levels, that temptation was beaten out of me, and it didn't feel like I was fighting against it in the harder levels, but rather working around it. With that said though, there are certainly problems with the gauntlets you fight. Usually stages have multiple waves of enemies coming at you, and when you clear one out, it's like a second before the enemies say, "Life has many doors, Ed boy," and spawn, and that spawn can be right beside you, maybe even close to on top of you. Sometimes I found myself losing life just from the enemies spawning really freeing close to me, and that can feel a bit cheap. Unfortunately, I'm now going to have to really bring down the mood and talk about an actually huge flaw with this game, and it's something that I've seen ruin the experience of several people in its Steam reviews. You cannot aim in the Crackpet Show. The game has a lock-on system that is serviceable at best and infuriating at worst, and I mean screaming at the game infuriating. Usually it tries its best to lock on to the nearest enemy, and that's usually where you want to aim, but removing the option to aim at all is a freedom that's absence is sorely missing here. Sometimes you don't want to hit the guy running at you. Sometimes you want to hit the guy in the back sniping you or buffing the other enemies, and it can be really frustrating when it feels like you have to fight against that auto aim. Sure, you can cycle between enemies with Q and E, but I found when I did this with a room full of dudes, it would cycle from the guy in front of me to the guy way in the back instead of picking the next closest target. When you are trying your best to avoid the hordes of bad dudes coming at you, the camera and aiming system shouldn't be another obstacle, but in this game, they certainly can be. This problem actually gets worse when you find guns that lob projectiles. Certain guns can fire over certain lowered barriers, and that's actually a nice element to the game. Cover doesn't feel so safe when there's enemies that can lob projectiles at you halfway across the map. And again, we're looking at another part of this game that de-emphasizes camping and makes you run around the stage. That's great. I think this design choice is also something that makes you a better player, and I'm glad it's in the game. So how does this gameplay element work when you're the one holding the gun that can fire over the walls? Really badly, actually. Sometimes you're going to encounter these squirrel enemies that love jumping like they're Sliver playing Deep Rock Galactic, and when they're in the air, they're untargetable and invulnerable. Guns don't really know how to target an untargetable enemy, and so what inevitably happens with these guys is that the gun will constantly aim for the exact spot where the squirrel was instead of where the squirrel is going to be. This has led to actual minutes of the game testing my patience, as the default lob gun would miss a target and I was forced to spend minutes hoping and praying that this gun would hit its target so I could move to the next stage. This is just bad, plain and simple. It wastes my time and it makes me never want to use these lob guns, and it's a problem that would be remedied by me having full control of my character. Full control of my character in the normal stages, that is. See, to give the game a point in its corner, when I'm at the boss and this many bullets are coming at me, I am forced to ask myself the question, does it really matter if I can aim here? The answer, I think, is no, but I'm not giving the game a point for not having aiming because it's made irrelevant in boss fights. It's more that the game has this flaw, and when you're playing the game's finest moments, that flaw is nullified or easier to work with. Although some bosses do spawn enemies that you have to change your target to, so I can't even lock that statement in. When I find negative criticism for this game, it always comes back to this auto aim, and I think a large part of your enjoyment with Crackpet will actually come down to whether or not you learn to deal with it. From my experience, well, yes, I had issues with it in the later stages of the game. I think with how easy the early stages are, you should be able to get a good sense of how your character moves and shoots before the game really starts testing you in that god-awful 6th episode. But to call the absence of aiming anything but a huge flaw here would honestly just be me lying to myself. You do have another avenue to help you when the game gets tough though. Every time you beat an episode, you get access to sponsor perks that give you tons of bonuses. Some of these are essentials, like enemies actually dropping health and getting another gun slot, but with 3 different trees and a solid capstone for each, you've actually got a lot of variety to screw around with your runs that you keep horribly dying on. There's a health and sustainability tree that creates stages that fully heal you, and one option that just takes a chunk out of the boss's health. There's a money and perk tree that increases overall money that you can earn to spend at the gun store and generally gives you more perks to choose from. And finally, you've got the weapon and power boost tree, which can give you an additional choice every time the game spawns a gun, and adds energy drink stages to the pool, which can increase different stats for a limited time. In this regard, there's actually a lot under the hood with how this game handles its run-altering perks. You get a set amount of points every time you beat a new stage, meaning you have to be very selective with what you've got and probably want to prioritize one tree, but later in the game you've got enough points to fill up a tree and a solid portion of the other two, and you can swap them all out freely between runs. A complaint I recently heard about roguelikes is that they usually require you to die a lot in the beginning to actually progress. In Hades' case, they start you off in the hardest version of the game and you get persistent powers that make the game easier. Sometimes it's cheaper than that though. I recently played Inscription and I was absolutely rolling my first run, right up until the game gave me an unwinnable scenario that I was required to die on to get farther in the overall story. There are, of course, benefits to this gameplay design, as making death a roadblock for your player can make them appreciate how tough it was to beat whatever killed them, and make them slow down and appreciate earlier levels. However, I think I'd tend to agree that perhaps death gating your player as a gameplay mechanic is starting to get stale. With Crackpet though, you're given a small, nothing amount of sponsor perks in the first stages when the game is actually easy, and then when that difficulty starts to scale up, so do the amount of game-changing perks that you can bring to each run. The game ramps up, and then gives you more options to meet that challenge, and from what I've played of roguelikes, it's actually a nice change of pace. Overall, this game was stupid difficult. Seriously, Rin's making a video about the Toho series, and I feel like I'm the one suffering out of the two of us. But in the words of a great man, challenges are meant to be broken, and after 22 gamer hours, I finally beat the Crackpet Show. And it felt great. The second-to-second gameplay forcing me to get better at it felt awesome. And I definitely had several one more run nights where I'd promise myself I'd go to bed right after, only to find myself hours into the night later, thinking this would be the run where I finally beat that stage. To close this out, I definitely recommend the Crackpet Show if you're into roguelikes like Hades or Isaac, or if this aesthetic is just your thing. I never liked Happy Tree Friends, but considering the broad appeal and success of that show, I'm sure that audience exists for weird animal eviscerating action, and I hope the Crackpet Show finds its niche. I've been your Kaznarius. Later, everybody. You should be able to get a good sense of how your character moves and shoots before the game really starts testing you in that god-awful 6th episode. In that god-awful 6th episode. In that god-awful 6th episode. 6th episode. 6th episode. I shot my penis in the corridor.